there. Right. Just going to check. Right. See that. I do apologise if the camera's wobbling and you're watching. Just going to try and drop that down a bit. No, it won't go. Sorry, hold on to your breakfasts. Just trying to adjust this a bit. There's quite a lot to try and fit into this view today, and I'm not 100% sure, but we'll... Oh, that's a bit too high because I'm like looking at the ceiling. Right, let's just see that I'm in the group to make sure I'm running. And then we'll get started. Oh, yes, there I am. Bear with me, apologies, just figuring out that I'm in the right place. Oh, hello, there's quite a few people there. Morning. I've got to sort of get used to the fact that I'm going to be seeing your comments there and looking there. So it's a new technique. Usually I keep the two lined up, so I'm going to have to remember to look up there. But I want to try and fit in quite a lot today. So good morning. I hope you're all well. Say hello. I'm going to come back to StreamYard to be able to see your comments. If you've not been to StreamYard before and you haven't given permissions for Facebook to show, or maybe the other way around, StreamYard to show your name, you just need to go to streamyard.com/Facebook. And there's a permissions thing there. And then I can see who you are, because otherwise it'll just say guest user, which is all right if there's one of you doing it, but if a couple of you do it, I don't know who's asking questions. And hopefully there'll be lots of questions as we go through. Right, now that I know I'm in the right place in the group, let's get back to StreamYard where I can see you. Oh, hello. I can actually see you saying hello now. Hi. Hello, hello, hello. Nice to see so many of you. Somebody's feeling a bit iffy. I'm not gonna guess who that is because it says Facebook user, but I will. Oh, it says Nikki. Sorry, sorry, Nikki, who's just joined us. I'm sorry to hear you feeling not feeling so well, but we'll hopefully catch up with you soon. Not to worry, plenty of time. So this is the first week of getting hands dirty, getting started. Quite a lot to get through in the session because I wanted to do all the stripping methods in one. So we'll see how we get on. Might be a bit ambitious, but we've got other sessions and obviously the session on Thursday as well, which I'm going to use as, rather than going through the exact same things again, which sometimes is difficult to restage if you've already done something. I'm going to use that as a Q&A session, but a recap session on anything. So it's not about, let's just talk about what I just did today, because there's obviously not that much time in between. Let's recap anything and go over anything, and I can show you things that you need to have maybe re-explained. So that's what it's for. So wherever you're up to, even if you're just deciding on your piece, you can share a picture with me, you can come into that session, and I can, obviously recap and make sure that you're feeling all right. So today is about getting back to the wood and about different stripping methods. So I've got my preferred methods. If you're new to this, you just basically can just follow what I do. But I do want to highlight some other methods as well, because there's an element of personal choice. There's some things to be careful of, especially when you're working with old veneers, which I think most of us are going to be. Solid wood, it's a slightly different beast, but I'll sort of point that out as I go through, but and show you my preferred method, but give you a bit of an understanding so that you can make your own choices within that, where they're sort of, you can swap them in and out for certain things. So final bits of prep really in terms of my piece. I mean, I've got it all stripped down and it's all clean. Feel free to sort of chip questions in as you go along, by the way. Happy to answer them at the time if it's relevant, because I might be able to re-describe something or do a close-up or something like that. I've got the close-up camera at the back, but just shout if something needs to be a little bit more visible. So yes, I've got that all strip down. I'm going to need to do some masking off before I come to my stripping, with stripping being a sort of wet method. You need to think about where that product's going to go. So today I'm going to cover off stripping with paint and varnish stripper, sanding, scraping using a sort of a scraper or cabinet scraper kind of tool, which I'll show you. And then I'll also look at the heat gun and then touch upon other methods outside of that, which I can't really demonstrate here, but just for awareness of them. So the first method I need to get underway is obviously the paint stripper, because it takes a bit longer to do. It's got to be left. So I'm going to get on with that. And with my piece specifically, so you might need to consider this with yours, do you need to mask any areas off where you don't want the paint stripper to go? Because once it eats into sort of the finish on, say, the back of a door or on an area that you're not going to strip, it can leave a bit of a dip where the finish is gone. You can also just leave grubby marks where the sort of the stripper itself has picked up the finish and it can deposit it. So it's just about keeping a nice fresh back. So I will be needing to do it with mine. So this is something to consider right at the very beginning. If you're sanding, not so much. So with mine, I've got these curved edges. So I'm going to have to mask off at the back in order to keep this. I don't want any stripper on this to start messing around with the finish, because this is going to get a different treatment. This is not going to be fully stripped. It's going to get, we're doing that, I think, week 4 when we're enhancing. So this is about refreshing what's already here, because it's in pretty good nick, and I don't want to have to strip it all back fully. So I'm going to mask off these curved edges so the stripper doesn't come around the edge. The top edges, as we'll see when we come onto it, and actually, rather than getting all fiddly with it, I probably will just sand those back. So there's some areas of my piece that I'm going to strip and use paint and varnish stripper, and some areas that I will actually sand because they're not as sort of precious and don't need as much care. So that's one thing to sort of think about right at the beginning. Do you need to do anything like that? Also with my other piece, this one. These are the doors off my big reproduction piece. I haven't been able to bring it in. I might have it in later this week. I've got to remember where you are, you're up there. Let me just get my scraper and my hammer, because this is something, if you're planning to remove bits of, I'm planning to remove this moulding on my doors, and obviously for the purposes of getting that stripped and sanded, I want to get those off. You could go around them. You're just going to cause yourself more damage, more trouble. So I'm just going to use my scraper tool, little hammer, and then I will slide that in underneath. Let's just do it up here. This is just getting the surfaces ready, which I could have done this week. But so I'm just going to tap that in. It's very, very flat, and it starts to lift those little bits of wood off, like so. So all you've got is a little piece of wood that's attached to the front, which, as I mentioned in the first session, is covering that line in the veneer. So it's got 2 different pieces of veneer there. But what I've also got is some little pins that have been holding that in place. You see it came off very easily. I'll just get something like maybe little pliers, but I've got these little tin snips, which allow you to sort of put your put the end of them down right flat, and then I just sort of rock it, and it allows me to pull up what is a very tiny, almost like panel pin for the beading. So if you've got anything like that, try that, but very gently, because you don't want to sort of snip through the metal. Worst comes to worst, you might just hammer it in, and I can just gently sort of rock those out. So those are my last bits of prep to do. Let's just do the last one, and then I can do the, if I can get it, then I can do the, show you this one on this with the stripper. Right, put that to one side. So those are my last little bits of prep on that. The other bit that I wanted to just follow up on as well, for anybody who's got a similar scenario to me, is this sort of prep in here. So I've done one side of it, it's just drying out at the moment actually, but that's come off quite well, so that just needs to be sanded. It was originally this very discoloured felt. And all I've done is sprayed that with the same sort of sugar soap solution and left it. Well, I've put some hot water on it first with a damp cloth, hot water, and then sprayed it and really saturated it with the sugar soap, which has allowed me to use basically the scraper, and it just scraped all of the felt residue off and all the glue. So now hopefully with a little bit of sanding, it will come up okay. But I can cross that bridge when I come to it later if I need to do any sort of refinishing to that. So that's the last bits of prep for that. Get some stripper on there because I'm hoping that within the time frame I might be able to. Well, I've got one started, which is good, but within the time frame I might just be able to get to the end and take it off. If not, Blue Peter style, we'll take this off that one, because what I would normally do with the stripper is to do 2 applications. But it's a bit of a sort of see how you go on with it. So let's get some on, and I'll talk about the sort of application of that while I'm doing it. So I think I need to come over here to check out whether the camera works or not, and then I'll put my close-up camera on. So just let's have a little look. Add to stream. There we go. Hi, good morning. Don't worry if you can't catch up right away. This will be available straight after, so you can always watch it this evening. Okay, I'm hoping that that's going to work. I might need to just adjust the close-up thing. The big problem is I can't see your comments from over there, so I'm going to have to come back. But we'll catch up with you. Okay, so this is my preferred method of, let's just change that. Mic is muted, good, that's what we want. Just change this angle. So you can see I've got one here with paint varnish strip on it already. I'll show you the one that I'm using for this. But can you see that it's already started to craze on the surface? You can see that there? Let's see. Can you see it in the light? It's difficult to know what you can see. It started to crack up already, and that's only been on about 10 minutes. So this is my preferred method for stripping vintage veneer, basically. I think that it's the easiest method, the safest method, particularly when you've got this old wood that's, it's just a thin layer of wood, isn't it, at the end of the day? So you don't want to be taking too much material off. And the thing about paint stripping is obviously it's taking the varnish off with it, but it can get in and it can really clean the wood. Whereas other methods that we'll come on to, in order for them to work, they've got to take some surface off, which is fine if you stop at the finish, but you could actually start to go through to the wood as well. So, you know, it's about using those ones with care, and I think they're all valid, and it's, like I said, a little bit of personal choice. So this is my preferred method. But I won't use it on the entirety of the piece because that's just not necessary. Initially, you may use it on an area and find later when it's plain wood and think, oh, I could have just sanded that. That's not a problem. I know some of these areas just by looking at them, I can tell that they're going to be plain. So I'm going to go through that with the sanding with you and show you the bits that I usually strip versus the bits I usually sand. And that's how I would normally approach a piece of furniture. And then I'll also show you the cabinet scraping, which is it's quite popular. People enjoy using it. I find it very manual, very physical, and I don't enjoy it for that reason. I like to be able to put something on and wander off and do something else. So there's something to be said for that. So this will just sit for 20-30 minutes. I'll come back and check it, and then I can add some more on if it still feels a bit sticky, and then go again. So I'll just show you how. Oh, try not to stand on the dog. Pop that out of the way. Okay. How are we doing for visuals? Do I need to scooch you in a bit closer? Let me just have a little look, because this is all new in the setup. I've already got the strip on me. All new in the setup. Oh, good. Maybe we can just, because I'm on wheels here, just bring it in a bit closer, and then I'll come back out. That might work a bit better. I'll bring it back out when I want to come to the sideboard itself. Kind of fit everything in. With the door here. So first things first, I just need to quickly do my masking in order for the strip not to come onto the edges here and around the back. So I'm just going to grab some of my frog tape and pop that on. I'm only going to do 2 sides because these ones here are a square. So actually, if a bit of stripper comes around the edge, you could mask it off, of course, you could be more cautious than me, but less masking tape, I suppose. Because the stripper will really come to here, I'm going to actually sand this edge to take the finish off. There's nothing here particularly to be precious about, so it's just easy just to blast through that with a sander and get the finish off. But anyway, we'll come on to sanding. We'll just get some tape on this edge. Just check you can see what I'm doing. You can't, can you? There we go. Up a little bit. Make you feel ill. There we go. There we go, there we go. So while I'm doing that, I'll talk about different paint strippers, because there's lots of different ones on the market, and I've tried quite a few, and plenty of them are effective, but I've come to the point of using the most eco-friendly, the most non-toxic. Well, actually, there's not many non-toxic ones. I think this is possibly not the only ones. But like I said, there's lots out there. And again, personal choice. And if you've got small shelves, we'd never say, don't use it what you've got. Just the more noxious ones, you just need to take more care in terms of ventilation and masks and things like gloves. Whereas this particular one I'm using today is pH neutral, non-toxic, and doesn't have any nasties like that. That's why I keep using it. And it's effective. But you can get some really intensive stuff, which I think works just as well. But it's quite nasty. So you may have seen, anybody's been hovering around the DIY, so you might have seen this Colon one, furniture stripper, which dissolves and handles everything, but it's incredibly high VOC, so it's very toxic, really smelly to use and unpleasant, and you just have to be really careful. So the stuff like that is not as nice to use and not as good for the planet. So although I've still got it on the shelf, just in case I come across a finish that defies me, because I'd say probably 85–90% of my finishes are fine with a stripper, but sometimes you need to sort of attack it in a slightly different way. There's just the odd one which might need, say, like the heat gun, because it's just too thick, for example, for the strippers to get through it. But again, I won't come on to that. So I am using today, and I highly recommend it, you can get it just about everywhere, and that's paint and varnish remover from Home Strip, which is water-based. Like I say, it's very low VOC and it's non-toxic, pH neutral, and even people with allergies and stuff. So that's why I like it. But I've also done side-by-side tests with this, and I did it side-by-side with an Authentico one, which is well used within the industry, Authentico BioStrip, which is a good product, good enough product. It's just like way more expensive. So you can do it for cheaper, is what I would say. And I found it a little bit drippy, perhaps not quite as effective, but this is on the eco side as well. So if you've already got this, that's a good product to use. And then most of the DIY stores do an own brand stripper that I used to use quite a lot. So like Screwfix and B&Q, and I even saw one in, I haven't got any to hand, unfortunately, because I've been buying one specifically. I spotted one in B&M. So Bartolene, I think it was. So there's no nonsense. There's I don't know what the B&Q range is called, but it's pretty much a similar product. But it is not eco-friendly. So that's probably the cheapest option. It's about £5.99, and this is I think £8.99, and then higher again for the Authentico stuff. So there are choices out there. You can get heavy-duty industrial stuff, but you're going to need proper ventilation and mask and etc. So I'd say go for something like this. If you can, and say widely available, so why not? And I'm just going to apply it with an old paintbrush, basically. I just keep them in a jar. They don't really dry out because this is the nature of paint stripper. It's actually hydrating the old finish to lift it. I might want to turn that over though. That would have been a bit of a disaster, wouldn't it? That's the problem about talking and doing it at the same time. So we'll get this. Just chop that off roughly, because it's on the back, isn't it? So I'm just going to give that a bit more of a rub. Make sure it's stuck down properly. And flip this over. I've got this raised up off my bench surface with just pieces of wood, effectively, sort of batons of wood underneath there. So anything you've got that could just raise it off your surface if you know you don't want it to drip, and you don't also want the product to come off and not be working. So, I was hoping I could see the things there, but I can't. So I'm just going to use probably quite a thick layer of it, and you want it to be white. You don't want to sort of brush it out and make it go clear. I'm going to go for the other brush actually. These brushes probably are a little past it because they're swollen out with all the product. So if you had a normal flat paint brush, you don't need anything special, and you want to kind of, in a technical term, blob it on. You don't really want to be making it all smooth and perfect. You want to see a thick white layer, effectively. So that's the sort of, don't be shy with it, basically. Doesn't need to be in any specific direction because obviously it's taking off the finish on this. But if it goes too thin, like this clear patch here, it's not enough product, and it's not going to activate for long enough, and it will dry out before it's had a chance to really get in and get the finish. And these old vintage finishes are generally quite good at just disappearing. I think it's the more modern sort of contemporary reproduction, all that sort of stuff, that is used sort of more factory finishes. I think they're the ones that I find harder to remove. So we'll come on to those. So we'll get this working, and then we'll just have a quick catch up about finishes before we start talking about sanding actually. Because like I said, usually leave it 20 to 30 minutes. And then check it, and then again. Sometimes you might have to go to 45 minutes. And if it's particularly warm, the good idea is to cover it with cling film, which stops it drying out and allows it to be sort of active longer instead of getting all sticky and dry, which is not what you want. So that's quite a thick coat. So, like so. And I'm going to do the other door as well because I want to see side by side. So this is the sort of furniture I normally work with. Okay, that'll do for now anyway. So I'm just going to pop that to one side as well. I've got that one over there. Actually, I'll put it on the floor. So I normally do the doors and the drawers and anything that I'm going to strip, as far as I can, I do it flat. So do it on the surface if you can, because obviously it's not going to drip. This does pretty good. It does cling very well, but if you've got to do it on the side of a piece of furniture like this, then obviously put something underneath it. Let's grab one of these. I can do this as well. Now this has got the moulding on, so I just have to go with that. I haven't managed to strip it all off yet. But let's see how this behaves with the stripper. So like I say, I think repo pieces tend to sometimes get a bit stickier because it's a more modern composition. But I'll just come back and talk about identifying different finishes in case you need to. As you can see, I'm not too bothered what the finish is because I'm going to take it all off. So it doesn't really worry me what it's made of. It's only if it's a really, really thick, shiny, plasticky finish that I know from experience that paint stripper probably won't handle it. So we'll just go straight to something like the heat gun. We'll come on to that. Let's get this on, and then we can come back to it throughout. Just check on it. It might surprise me. So, might have to do the whole door. I'm sort of in the process of putting pieces together for this. I've sort of half stripped this and half sanded that, and just to see what the different reactions are. Okay, there's probably not quite enough on there, but I don't want to spend too long playing with it. Yeah, I need to get on the sides. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. Right, come back over. No questions. Okay, that's good. So just wanted to touch upon the subject of finishes, because obviously in this course, really, I'm advocating that we're taking the finishes off because we've talked about finishes being aged and degraded or damaged, and also perhaps sort of obscuring the wood underneath. So we're talking about taking them off. We did mention last week about if some finishes were in good nick, did you want to keep them? And I think it is worth saying that you can replenish certain finishes. So you may have on your piece, areas that you want to fix up because they're damaged, but there might be areas that you do want to sort of figure out what that finish is so that you can replenish it. And that's sort of things like oils, waxes, even shellac. There's not as many of the pieces of the era that I've got. It tends to be older pieces, French polished pieces that are made of, have like a shellac finish. And so in that, you might want to identify what the finish is. So in the resource area, there'll be some notes about how to go through the identification. And it's essentially using either oil or water or a solvent on the surface. So you can literally get like a little cotton bud, effectively, grab some, say like methylated spirits, would show you if something's shellac because it will melt it because it's the solvent in it. And a shellac-based finish can be remelted effectively using the solvent and then redistributed and reapplied. I wouldn't necessarily advocate us doing that. I think that was something that perhaps you'd do. But if you wanted just to fix something and sort of spot fix it, that's something you could look at doing. If in fact the methylated spirit melted the finish, that's a shellac finish, you could spot fix it. I'm not going to advocate when we get to week 5, I think, with finishes. We'll go into much greater detail. It's not a finish that I would suggest because it's not very protective. We will be talking about shellac, but not as a finish. Other finishes like varnish, and like polyurethane. Polyurethane, if you put methylated spirit on it, will just sit on top of it. It won't do anything. If you put it on a varnish, it will eventually start to eat it away. So I'll have some little notes on sort of deducing that, so that if you do want to just spot fix something. So if it's an oil finish and you just put a drop of oil on your piece, it will absorb in, whereas every other finish, it will just sit on the surface. So if, say, for example, you've got oiled teak, for example, and a little drop of oil does absorb in, you could refresh that surface just with the oil. So that would be something you could do to care for that furniture and just to revive it, essentially. But if the finish is aged or darkened or damaged, or you want to add a design on it, because you obviously can't then put that on over an old finish, this is where we're going to start taking the finish off. So if you do want to think about sort of refinishing what you've got, you need to figure out what it is. So have a little look at the notes and go through it and sort of figure out what you might be working with based on what solvent will sort of start to make it sticky, and then you can think about refinishing it. But I think what we're going to focus on here is the sort of the full restoration. But if you've got any questions about your pieces and you're not sure what your finish is, because you want to maybe go in a different direction, that maybe there's areas you do want to restore, we can have a look at that together and figure it out. It's easy enough. So because I'm taking all of mine back, like I say, I'm not worried what it is particularly. Mostly my stripper is going to handle these finishes, and that's not a problem. But I am going to do normally 2 different approaches to it. So I will use my paint stripper on all of the veneer that is sort of really nice, and all of the sort of attractive bits of wood, which would be all of the drawers, all of the drawer fronts, all of the doors, and the top, and probably the sides too, although that could probably go either way. You could probably stamp that as well. And particularly because I've got quite extensive damage, I need to be quite careful of how I approach that. And I don't want to be doing something which might sort of scrape that off. So that's why using the paint stripper really is. I think it's the safest, sort of least risky approach. But we will talk about the scraping and the sanding and sort of show you the sort of options. And if you find that that's something you prefer, that's great. Like I said, if you're doing it for the first time, I would go down the paint stripper and the sanding route, and don't worry about other things. You can always experiment later on and have a little look at those in time. You're not really helping me sitting there. So let's have a talk about the sanding aspect while we're waiting for my stripper to move along. Let's just, no, perhaps he's forgotten that I'm doing a live session. Never mind, I hope you can hear me okay. We're up to, we are going with sanding. So let's start off with, the dog is right under my feet. Let's make him that way. Pull back and have a little look at my piece. We start off about hand sanding because I'm aware that not everybody will have an electric sander, and there's plenty of stuff you can do by hand in order to sort of get your piece ready to be finished. Are we in the right place? Let's just have a look. Maybe you can hear me. Right, okay. My concentration levels go a little bit when he's doing that, which is fine when I'm doing stuff, but it's just when I'm trying to think of what I'm going to say. Yes, okay. So for the purposes of sanding this, I'm going to sand all of the areas that I know aren't particularly exciting wood. So let's get the drawers out, because obviously I would be stripping these all like this, stood up on their ends with the stripper on. Obviously we can only do so many of those in this session. That's how I would work on those. And then it's all of this area really that I would be sanding, just to sort of tidy it all up and around here. And I will also probably sand my legs as well down the bottom, because the wood on there isn't very exciting. I can see that it's just a dark varnish, and where it's actually broken up in the where the scratches are, it's a pale wood underneath. So I'm not going to go through the whole rigmarole of painting that with stripper and then trying to scrape it all off. I'm going to sand those, and I'm also going to paint them. So I will sand them in a slightly different way. So for the purposes of getting back to the wood on the areas that I want to sand on the piece of furniture, I'm going to use quite a low grit sandpaper. So let me go on the scissors actually, because I need those two. Now mine just happened to be on a roll. You obviously buy these in sheets in the shops, but I have a sander that this also fits on, it sort of clips on, so I can use them for both. And it's just a question of cutting it into the same shapes that you would if you had a big piece of sandpaper and you sort of fold it into sort of quarters, don't you? So that's all it is. But if you're doing a lot of it, this is quite useful to have and quite nice to hang up on the wall. But I know some people who've got electric sanders, then use the electric sanding sandpaper as their hand sanding. So it's, you know, either. So this is I've got 60 here. 60 grit, which is pretty coarse sandpaper, which means that it's going to take the finish off effectively. It's going to take off quite a lot of material and give me a nice fresh surface. So I tend to go for 60 for that. You can go coarser, like a 40. So the lower the number, the bigger the particles are effectively. So the coarser it is. So a 40 is even more coarse, really, really big pieces of grit on there, but it's going to leave lots of scratches. And then I'm going to have to come behind it and smooth it out with the next grit along. So effectively going through the grit means smoothing out the large scratches from the previous paper. So this is taking off a lot more material, which will take off my finish. So that's why I would go for sort of a coarse one if I wanted to do these sort of edges. So I've got little cork blocks when I'm hand sanding because I find them nice and comfy to use. You can get rubber, I don't know what you would call them, pads, but they sort of, you paper clips in, which I just find a little bit too big for my hand. There are different sort of things out there, but the cork block is nice and light. It's got little sort of chamfered edges here, which stop the edges of the thing digging in. And it gives you a good flat surface to get a nice even sand. However, you will need to use little pieces of it to help you sand your piece as well. So if I just go up and down with the grain, so I'm going to follow the pattern that's going up and down the wood there, so that the scratches actually lie in the same direction as the fibres of the wood. If I go across, you start to see them cutting across where the fibres of the wood lie, and that can look quite ugly. So we want to always try and do everything we do really with the grain, because then everything sort of looks fairly sort of smooth and sort of lies down nice. So if I hold it down like so, you see that that's quickly taken me back to the wood, and it's not very exciting. This is probably, I wonder if it is edge banding actually. Yeah, so just a bit of that edge banding. We talked about where they have a separate piece of wood that they stick on, so it sort of hides the edges of the veneer, and there's a different wood inside. But you can see how that's really effective for taking that back to the wood. But it's going to be quite coarse, so I'm going to then afterwards, once I finish with my 60, I'll then move on to 120. So the three papers I use the most: 60, 120 and 180, so progressively getting finer. There are grits in between, but I just don't think it's necessary to have crazy amount. This does the job. And then we would smooth that afterwards with our 120, which will deal with the bigger open scratches, smooth that wood. Doesn't really take much, just sort of knocking back what we've just done. Most of the work was done on the first pass, and then I will go up to 180, which will smooth that, ready to take a finish at the end. So it might be that I decide to stain that once I've got everything else finished, stripped and ready. I'll stand back and have a look at it. So when we come to sort of looking at ways to enhance and ways to bring out the grain, I'll know what the colour of that is, and I can decide I want to stain this in. And I'll show you how you can sort of see what the colours of the wood are going to be, and I can work that out. Because for me, these bits are underneath my doors, so you know, I don't think I'm going to be painting them, making them look jazzy. I think they just want to sort of subtly fit in. So then I would go down to my 180, which is a fine sandpaper. And then I just go over that, ready to finish. And I don't go any more than that because I don't ever want to stain it. And if I go to a higher grit, it's like 220, which is super fine, I might start to seal the pores and close the pores of the wood, which would stop anything penetrating. So I'm just going to leave it at 180 on those fine bits, on those plain bits of wood that just aren't very exciting. I could easily do this with the electric sander, so I'll come on to this sander in a minute. When it comes to things like you want to paint, I will mention that now, even though we're focusing on wood refinishing. My legs are, I know that they're plain, I can tell. So it's fine if you've stripped this stuff to find that out. That's okay. I'm going to just sand these ready to be, let's see if you can just see them. There we go. I'm going to sand these just for painting, so they're going to be metallic. I don't want to go to the extent of taking it back to the wood, because when I'm painting, I just need to make sure I've got a smooth, sanded, sort of scuffed surface, which the paint can stick to. So cleaned and scuff sanded is all I really need. I don't need bare wood. I mean, I know some people like to take it back to bare wood, but it's extra effort. The only time I would probably go further back to bare wood is if I've got lots of deep scratches, or you know, maybe bits of wood that need smoothing. I might need to take it a bit further back in order to get it smooth. But let's just, if I'm using the, I'm doing scuff sanding, I go straight to the 180, so that's the last grit before refinishing. So all I'm going to do is effectively keep surface, and some of the finish might come off actually. But that's okay. You can actually see maybe a little bit has come through here, but I don't need that to be perfectly white as I would this if I'm just going to paint over it. As long as it feels smooth to my fingertips, it's fine. And I can go ahead and paint that once I've got the dust off. Whereas something I'm going to stain, I don't want to see any discoloration of the old and the new. I need that to be completely clean, because otherwise when you stain it, you'll still see that marking. Here, it doesn't matter, but it does matter that I make sure I get all the shine off before doing that all in with the grain again, as much as I can. I mean, it is as much as we can. There's some bits you just can't get to, and do your best. And then I've got some missing bits of wood down the edge here, which have been nibbled, a bit like the bottom of my door. So then what I'd probably do is go up a grit. It's a bit more coarse. It's like flipping the emery board over for the rougher side. And I'll just go to the 120 and smooth those out there. Using the flat of that helps me build that edge. But if I feel it and I think I'm starting to change the shape to try and get rid of those bits of missing wood, try and smooth them out, it might be that they need filling. And you can only sand away so much before you end up with a hole or a divot where it was. So it might be that there's a bit of filler needed on the edge there, which I'll be doing next week, along with things like gluing, etc. So that's getting that ready to paint. Then we're moving on to the electric sander. So I would go around all of these front areas. The internals, we'll talk about how we're going to refresh those in a week or two. And it's the same with the tops of drawers, as I was saying about stripper. And I'm going to strip the nice wood here, treat that with kid gloves. And then because this is, it's that dark varnish that's been used to sort of disguise edge banding. Again, I can just get in with my rougher grit and just sand that back. And making sure that I get it really nice and clean with no finish on at all. If I want to leave that as wood, if I'm going to paint that, it's not so much a problem. Okay. So now I'm going to just get out the electric sander. And it's the same theory with the sandpaper again. However, I would suggest if you, and this is for people who've got an electric sander and who want to use it, if you're new to it and you haven't got one, you don't need one, you can use the sort of stripping and the hand sanding technique. I would suggest I wouldn't go at full surfaces like this for hand sanding. I would use your stripper and then use the hand sanding just for the detail parts. So yeah, I'll come on to the details in a second. But if you've got an electric sander and you do want to use it, and I know plenty of people do use sanders for all furniture like this as well with the veneers, and there's nothing wrong with it. I guess I'm a bit risk averse, and I know things can go wrong, and you can, what we say, blow through the edges of the veneer when you're using a sander, because it's actually moving much quicker than we can. You would have to be going some to hand sand through a veneer. So it's just risky, and it's not to say that I haven't done it, and I do it. The advantage of sanding and scraping that will come onto is you don't have to wait. You could be finishing it in the same day, but it does take a lot more of your time to stand there doing it, and a lot more sort of physical effort if you wanted to do it that way. So it's that's where the personal choice comes in. Do you find that sort of soothing and interesting, sort of standing there, and can you keep your attention focused and make sure you're not going too much in one area, and you're keeping your pressure even? That's why I'll probably go for stripper, because there might be points where I just think, right, I want to do something else now, or your attention wanders, and that's when you can just mess something up. So stripper is your safest option. But there's also some limitations on my piece of what the sander can do effectively. So it might be piece by piece. You might find some things work better than others. Flat surfaces, for example, obviously with the sander are going to work much easier. Some of my curves I can do, some of my curves I can't do. So let's just grab that. Where's my other drawer? Oh, it's there. Yeah, so my doors, these ones are tricky. Looking good. I'll just do a little check of that. Let's come back and just do a little check of that. Let's see if we need to put any more on. What are we doing for time? Oh, gosh, sorry, I just need to plug in my laptop. Sorry, Doug. Thought I'd done that, so I apologise. There we go. A lot of things to get set up for this one. Yes, so we'll have a little look at the stripper. I didn't realise I'd left the close-up on the whole time, so that's really helpful. This one's started to break up as well. As you can probably see that sort of cracking. Let's go for. Is the scraper. I actually bought a new scraper this week, which is very exciting. Maybe the one's gone around somewhere. This is from B&M, but I like it because it's the same as the one I've got, which is around some I can't do it. It's got a tapered edge, which I find much better for stripping. Ooh, this is a nice one. That's very heavy. So this is another style that I've had before, which has got a thin edge, but it's very straight. And I find sometimes it digs in, whereas this has got a, well, I hope so. I'll find out when I go back to my old, I'll give it a whirl. But all I'm going to do at this point is just test it. So I'm just going to have a little look at an area. On the big side, actually. I can do it with my fingers because it's one toxic stick. That is, let's try this little one, this little funny thing here. It's quite useful sometimes, but yeah, it's a little sticky still, but it's not been on that long. Let's just put some more back where it's taken it off. Give it a little bit longer. Come back to it because it's still got quite a lot of active stripper on there with it being white. And then let's look at the sanding. Let's take a close up of this time. Bear with me. Okay. So let's get my sander around here. If you do have one at home, say you've got one in the shed, and you're not sort of doing furniture on a regular basis, and you want to use it, just it probably is better to use the orbital style sander, which means the plate goes round, moves backwards and forwards, rather than a belt sander or what's the other kind? So the name slipped. Is it plane sander? Where it goes in one direction, which they tend to take up a bit too much material. So you end up with an orbital sander or a mouse sander, that kind of thing, which more sort of low key. And so I've got a series of these sanders, and orbital sanders don't have to be round. You might have heard of orbital sanders that are like a big disc, but this is orbital. But I like it because it's got sort of corners. So this sort of style is great for big tops, but less for detail because obviously with a circle it only ever makes a circular footprint, so you can't get into some areas. And then another style that's quite useful is, this is like, it's like a big mouse, but it's a delta. And so that's obviously got a corner, a point there, which is quite useful for doing things too. But this is the one I use because it's, if I had one of these for this as well, that would be great. I have both, but it's the best of both worlds. And it takes half a sheet basically, so it actually works with a hook and loop system, but some of them obviously clip on with regular sandpaper. So I'm going to just show the sanding of this side by side. Let's see if we can get that on there. I'm struggling a bit with the camera angles, I have to say. Trying to do 10 different things at once. Let's see, does that work? Possibly. We'll do it on the other one, where the stripper is. Okay, we'll do it here, we'll do it here. Oh, sorry, I'm getting myself in a bit of a flap trying to figure out the best way to do it. Because there's a lot of things here, isn't there? There we go, that might be a bit better. I think if we just move all the stuff off the table, I'll have to put it all back again, that's what I was thinking. Okay. So, obviously I'm going to talk while I'm doing it, but one of the key things is keeping it moving, keeping it flat. But when it comes to things like, and this is a very good example actually, because I've got curved edges, but let me just grab, the drawers are all left, is going up to the edges and being careful. Right, I'll do it on a drawer. I'll do it on a drawer. No, we should be facing that way then. It's just, so it's these areas here that are most at risk as we're sanding through because the pad's going so much quicker, and it can end up too concentrated on area. So it's really about kind of keeping it moving, smaller movements as well, because I need to be aware of what damage I've got. This piece is quite sound actually, so that's, I don't need to worry about catching anything. But sort of going up to the edges, but not going over them and kind of going up towards them. Sometimes you can get like a little edging of colour, but instead of working over it, what I probably would then suggest doing is to then hand sand that out, because that's too easy to blow through the veneer, and then you end up seeing basically the wood underneath and you lose the top. Now we're going to come on to fixing that sort of thing, because you can have bits of veneer missing like I've got, and bits can just fly off. You know, it's not to, you know, it's not the end of the world. We can fix it, but obviously we don't want to add more than, you know, by being sort of a bit too adventurous with it and adding more damage to fix up. But don't worry if it happens. You know, we'll work it out. But because this is an orbital sander, I don't need to worry so much about going with the grain, because it's going round and round. I just need to not move it too quickly and to make sure there's no sort of stuff stuck to my pad, which can actually make little swirly marks on it. I've got some scratches there, which hopefully should all smooth out. Vibrating noise. It's going to make a horrible noise. So, here, there we go. Okay. See the colour already starting to come away from the edge, so I'm just going to back up to it. can see, this is the risky stuff for me. That piece there has started to get more attention because of the curve in my piece. So it's just about being really careful, because that could get so much attention that it starts to actually go through. If it does, you start looking at it thinking, have I gone through the veneer here? And then before you know it, you can have gone through. So it's just being really careful, because the veneer is only like, an 1/8 of a millimetre thick in some instances. So it is possible. And I would probably want to concentrate on that more than I was doing on a demo with you, because when I did it yesterday as a bit of a, so you could see the after effect, it went a lot smoother. So that's the effect of it when I was fully concentrating on making sure to keep it moving, not backing up to the edge, not going over the edge too much. So that's actually quite a nice effect. Let's just try and get that in the light properly. There we go. That's actually come out quite nicely with the sanding. There's still some areas which I think might need a bit of hand sanding where there's a bit of colour. So I'd hand sand that afterwards. But as you can see there, I was a bit cautious because I felt like it was getting too much attention on the curve for that one. So just go easy with it, really, and you just need to stay on the ball and be very vigilant about it, is all I'd say, which you don't have to do with stripper. Another thing that's quite useful to know, when I can find it, here it is. So what I was going to say was, sorry, I'm distracting myself because I don't know whether I'm going to go next door and ask them to stop sanding, because it's quite difficult for me to concentrate. Yes, that's what I was going to say. When I'm sanding a piece of furniture like this and it's the veneer that I'm sanding in that way, what I would do is not go to the heaviest grit though. So I would go for a 120. If you can get away with a 180, but often that just doesn't take off enough material. So I go for a 120 rather than going all the way up to something like a 60, because I think it's going to go too fast through the finish and take off too much wood. And that's what we really need to think about with sanding and scraping, is we just need to keep an eye on how much material we're taking off, because it's thin. If it's solid wood, go for your life, get in behind it, it's not a problem. And you want to smooth that surface out and you want to refresh that surface, but with the veneer you just need to go a little bit slower. So I would say start with your 120, because that's what I had on here. And so that's what I'm going to keep on. But things like curves, if anybody's got a sander, if you don't have one, it's worth looking to see if you can get one or cut one to fit your sander, which is an interfacing pad. So that's the pad which just saves the, mine's rather knackered, saves your sander, protects it from wear and tear. Although I do have a bit of I do use the corners a little bit, because sometimes you do need to lift up a little bit just to stop it getting too much attention in one area. So you do use the corners a bit, but that's what that's for, that's to protect it. But by using 2 interfacing pads, you can create a little bit more of a squishy surface. So you can get a little bit more purchase on curved areas, which is all right when it's concave, but not so much when it's convex, because it sort of doesn't go that way, it goes the other way. So let me just put that back on. So I've got double interfacing pads on now, and that lets me come to the corner much more than with a flat surface. So that would usually have like a ventilation thing on, but I switched it off just so the noise isn't so great. You can see that still hasn't gone through the finish. So that's showing a little patch there. This is the finish. This is just where the finish is scuffed, and then I can just see the wood here. So I've got to do quite a bit more to get through it. You can see that bit there. Let's see if you can see that bit there. You can see that that's gone through quite nicely, but there's still some more bits here that I need to sort out. So it's being really, really vigilant about it, because you don't want to go, once I've finished that bit, I need to keep moving on. Okay. Thank you for that question, Shona. That was me. I should have said that at that time. Let's have a look. Shona's asked, are you starting with 60 using electric sander or a higher grit? Yes, a higher grit. So I want a higher number, smaller particles, because I think the control over the control over it at the speed it's going, you could easily just whiz through the veneer. So yeah, go for a 120 on your electric sander. Some old finishes that are quite broken up and quite, I use the word desiccated. Some old finishes that are quite tired and you can loose on the surface almost. You might get away with a 180, and you might even get away with a hand sand to get it off. But it's personal choice, because I think most of us prefer to do like less physical effort, so hand sanding can be quite tiring. And it's fine for small details, but perhaps you don't want it for bigger pieces, bigger areas, larger areas. You want to use a sander. The thing to say about this sort of thing is I have to then come behind, and I had to do it on this one. And in here, I've got bits of finish still where the sander couldn't get in there, and so that's when I will use little pieces of paper. So let's just get me some paper. I'll go in. I'll try 120 because I think that won't take much. So I just use a piece of paper that, just a smaller piece of sandpaper effectively, and fold it and get into those areas. So I fold it, push it up against the edge, and then come up and down. Use my fingers to try and get in that area if I can. This is much easier with stripper, obviously, because you can just scrape right up to that edge. The temptation, of course, is to go to get into that edge. If you do, I could do the beading at the top that way, but I want to avoid scratching the wood on the drawer itself that way, because by doing that, I'm going to end up with scratches going that way, and I'll need to even those scratches out because they will show through any finish I put on. So I need to just try and be good and make sure that my movements are up and down with the grain, so along the lines. So that's where the little pieces of paper can be quite useful, just to get into areas that you can't reach with any of the tools, really. I've got some nibbling here that I'm going to fill, which I'll fill next week as well. And then we'll come on to the scraping, because that's that other side there. You can see them side by side. I think we need to jump on the stripper. Let's see, there's another question. Debbie says, my piece is a hardwood dresser which has been gloss painted. I suspect because the original finish is a very dark stain. How deep will the stain penetrate, and should I be able to lift it out with something or sand it off? First of all, great to see a photo and have a little look at it. It's not really possible to say without getting into it. It might be that with it just being gloss painted, that stripper is your first port of call, because obviously you've got solvents in your gloss in terms of sanding. But from experience, gloss paint can come off quite nicely with stripper. It comes off like a skin, like a layer. So it might be worth giving that a go first. With your strippers, if you've got different levels of things going on, it will activate and work on one at a time. So I've had a piece before that was the gloss paint, emulsion paint, and people just slap loads of stuff on over time. And so it will activate and go through one at a time. So that's one approach. I think there isn't a one answer to this one. You could start it with sanding and have a look at how you get on. It might just be that it all whizzes off really easy and you think, great. And if it doesn't, if it proves to be quite laborious and it's not coming off nicely, then I'd go for something like a stripper, which is going to get underneath it much more. If you've sanded it and there's still some residue there, but you know that came off quite easily at a certain amount of it, but you've still got some residue in the wood, you could then use a thin coat of stripper just to get and clean out the wood afterwards. So it's not there's not one answer there. It might be a little bit of sort of sussing it out and figuring out which way is the best way to go. Some stains go in quite deeply, and some stains they can literally just be sanded off the surface. So it's a bit difficult to say, really. I think the veneers, obviously being thinner, they don't have such deep penetration of but when you says hardwood, do you know whether it's veneer? Do you know whether it's solid, or do you need maybe some help to sort of figure that out? Because I think the stains penetrate less deeply on the veneers because there's less place for it to go effectively. So that might be a bit of a suck it and see. And with the dresser, perhaps you can do what I've done and try. I would probably try the dry sanding first, because you know if that's easier. But you can always try different methods on different doors. You know, if it's got more than one. Yeah, it's a bit of a test that one out, I think. Where do we get to? So let's go and have a little look at the stripper. And if there's any questions you want to ask about sanding, I can come back to it and you know show you any more bits that you might need in relevance to maybe your piece. Might have got different features to mine that you might be thinking, how do I get in there? Or details that you're thinking, how do I get in there? So let's try and get the camera back on. I need like a cameraman, don't I? Trying to do it all by myself. We're all there. I'll just take that down for now, but if you want to give me any more info about it, I'm happy to dig into it. So let's see. I'm putting both up. Oh, yes, I do need a cameraman. It's not so bad when you're just showing one piece of furniture, but when you're showing about three. There we go. Right, so this is the one that's been on less time, and then this one over here has been on longer. I see the colours coming through already though, which is lovely. Ooh. I'm going to have to make space first because I'm getting all over my hands. So this is where you could actually wear some nice gloves. But actually this is non-toxic, so it's not, I'm not worried about the skin per se, but what's coming off in the varnish might be the yucky bit. So, oh, I know, I used it for getting eating off, didn't I? Okay, so I don't think there's a great deal of difference, but we can start to strip that one if we need to. Grab my other scraper as well. So, this is the one from before. Yeah, that's going to need a bit more. Yeah, so there's a tackiness to what's left behind. It needs some more. You can see it's nearly all gone clear. So I'm going to put, I'll put some on this one. And speed it along. And I'm not going to put as much on the second time. It probably has been. I should have put some more on before, but never mind. I'm not going to put as much on. I just want to sort of boost it, I suppose, a bit, but not the same amount as before. Otherwise, you just end up scraping all that off at the end. So if you're using the same stuff as me, or any of the ones I mentioned actually, the sort of high street strippers, doesn't sound right, does it? I just keep these in a jar. I mean, some of them come in a bottle, so you have to decant them to use them. So I've got a big jar with my brushes in, and it just sits on the side. You don't need to wash them. You don't need to cover them or anything, because as you can see, it just rehydrates itself. So that's a nice and easy thing for the workshop. And then I'll show you my favourite method for getting it all off without too much stress and hassle. And you'll see that it actually is pretty easy. Right, we'll leave that, and we'll go and talk about the scraping and any more on sanding if you want to. I won't probably do the other two. I don't want to do the other one actually. The other one is down here. Let's have a little look at them actually. I think this one's doing exactly the same thing. It's got the splits, but it's yeah. No, let's put the coat, and in case you get time to take it off, and you can compare the finish between the three different stripping methods. So at least you can see them side by side. So just topping it up really, redistributing it, filling in those gaps where it's finished. But so it doesn't take very long between, but you don't want to leave it too long, because then it can all start to, you wouldn't go away and just leave it overnight and think, oh, well, I'll come back to it. It'll still be wet. It'll probably have dried out to a sticky goo by then. You could probably put more stripper on just to get it going again, but yeah, you don't want to leave it too long. So not more than a couple of hours really. Just get rid of that. Come back. Right. Okay. So the other method that you might be intrigued by, which I've used a few times, and it's pretty effective, and I know a lot of people swear by it, is to use a scraping method. Let me just turn off that close up. There we go. Is to scrape the finish off, which is actually quite an old-fashioned method, but it's sort of been modernised, I suppose. And so a cabinet scraper, let me just make sure I'm looking at the right place. There we go. A cabinet scraper, so it's literally a piece of metal, which would be sharpened on a whetstone, and they would just literally scrape the finish off. So that's an old cabinet maker's tool, which didn't work out terribly well for me, because I realised I had to get a whetstone or a proper knife grinder and grind that to a blade, and I just thought, I'm going to cut myself. And then you've got to maintain it, so that didn't go terribly well. But this is a carbide paint scraper, which you can get in most of the DIY stores, I think. This one's about £25, I think, or 20 something, from Amazon, but I have it on good authority. You can get them from Screwfix and all kinds of places, much more cost effectively. And it comes with a blade already in it, and you can probably see there by the shape of the blade that it's actually reversible. So you could just turn it around when it gets blunt, rather than having to have it sharpen things yourself. Plus, it's also got a nice ergonomic way of holding it, which the cabinet scraper hasn't got. So that's definitely got some pluses about it, in order to get some movement behind it. And that's going to scrape the finish off entirely, which can be really, really effective, and really effective on solid, thick finishes, sound finishes, I would say. Flat surfaces, probably more so. I mean, you can be very sort of tender with it and very gentle and go along some of these things. But I guess, I mean, I've seen how popular they are. I tend to work with quite terrible damage, and that's what worries me about this. It's like, can I catch it? So if you're intrigued by them, definitely give one a go. The great advantage of stainless sanding is that you can be ready to refinish in a day. This is probably the most exhausting of all, because it's, loads of arm power. But it's a dry stripping process, and once you've got the finish off, you can get on. You don't have to wait overnight like you do for stripper to dry out. So once I've cleaned this, I will have to wait. Usually I'll leave it overnight in order to get that sort of dry surface to allow me to finish it, ready to be, zhuzhed up at the end. Because the scraping and the stripping will both need some sanding at the end just to finesse it, just to get them ready perfectly, which the sanding obviously doesn't. So that's something to look at. I find them very useful in workshops where we want to do it in a day and somebody says, oh, I wanted the top of that done as wood, finished as wood, and I can't do stripper because it's too long a process, the wood's going to get wet, is to grab one of these. You just, again, like sanding, need to go steady, watch what you're doing, and keep your pressure and your strokes even. It's quite easy to gouge, and again, for me with my attention span, I get into something, you're doing it for a while, and you go, oh, just one of the edges could catch. So if you're very sort of methodical and very sort of focused, you probably really enjoy this. What I found when I've used it in the past, if this has got quite a thin finish on it, and this is quite a fine wood, with it being walnut, it's quite a closed grain. So it does take quite some doing, and you can actually see. You see the shiny bits is where the finish still is. So I've got to scrape some more there in order to get that off. And so you just have to be kind of quite careful, really. I've also got some damage here across the bottom, and here specifically, while I was scraping, it actually just did flick off a bit of the veneer, because this will be really, really dry and old. So I don't really like it for this, I must admit. It works really well, however, on the reproduction piece, because obviously it's nice and flat. The wood, it's a closed grain, but it's much younger, I suppose. It's not as old as this piece. It's not as crumbling. It's not had as hard a life, I suppose, as well. And so using it on that has had quite a good effect, actually. You can see there, this side's sanded and this side's scraped. So I do have to go over it and sort of get more of the finish off. You can see some of the finish here. So it's taken about 3 passes to get it back. But whereas sanding, you might have to it probably takes you twice as long to get back to the wood as it does with cabinet scraping. You just, in some instances, you'll be straight through it, which is wonderful. And then you might have to go 2 or 3 times over. But there you go. Real world. Where are you going? I gouged it with the corner. I just went the wrong way and just caught it, and I caught it again here. So that, that's you've got to choose what works for you. And those sort of things, they are actually in the wood. So that's not really great. Plus for me, this is confusing. It's got grain going this way. So you're kind of best to scrape with the grain, I think, just in case you do scratch it. You don't have to. You can go down. So I'll do a little demonstration, because I'm better to do this flat. Again, a bit like sanding. It's best to do it if you can, so you can put your weight behind what you're doing. I could go down, but I have to just be really careful not to cause much damage. So let's see. Let's start on another one. I'll put that up on the top there as well. So yes, I'm not going to be doing that on this piece here. I think it's had enough abuse over the years. So this is the one where I've removed the beading from the end, so that should work out quite well. Just make sure you can see what I'm doing. Has anybody fancied using the cabinet scraper but not dared yet? It's not essential. If you are brand new to this, I would get yourself a tub of stripper and some sandpaper and some cork blocks, and you'll be absolutely fine. That will, get into the side of it. Now, probably with this, I might want to use a clamp or something to hold it to a tabletop if I was doing it, or you could do it on the furniture itself. Might be another way to do it, but it is a bit harder on the shoulders. I find it easier with sanding and everything to do it flat. So a little clamp. Let's just see if that works. Actually, yesterday I was just doing it one-handed, which is fine also. But we could try that. These are little clamps that are in the supply list, which is we'll be using to do repairs and stuff next week. So I just try and attach it. That just give me a little bit of stability to push it with both hands. If not, I'll do it one-handed again. Winging it with demos, so. I pause here to say also, you see that finish coming off, this is where a mask would probably be a really good idea, but I won't be able to talk to you, so we won't do it for this one. So I'm actually scraping, pulling towards me because the blade's on one side, rather than pushing it backwards and forwards. It probably would scrape, but it hasn't got a sharpened edge on that side. So I can go right in along the, right in along the beading if I wanted to keep the beading. You have to be a bit plucky with it because it's a disconcerting noise. Myself out the way, but it's quick. So if I just take that out, gently, see how quick it is. So that's already, this is why people love it. That's already removed most of the finish, and because it's all surface, this is bare wood. Now, how much more colour change? This is what I'm going to compare between the doors. When I strip one, I'll probably finish off scraping this one and maybe finish off sanding the other one, and just look at the colour changes and just see if there's any stain left in the wood on them. Because obviously each piece of furniture and each finish and all the wood, it varies, but I'm just interested to see a side by side, which obviously when you're doing a piece, when you're selling a piece, you wouldn't necessarily test out different things side by side, just in case they're different. So that's really good. However, that's still got finish on it there. So I need to go over that. When we come to next week, I will show you a little tip that I use to figure out if you've got any finish left before we move on. So you're just going to have to judge it by eye at this stage. And then I was saying about trying to do this stuff, could it go against the grain? Gently, is what I'd say. I mean, you can do the beading with this thing. If you wanted to, you can just lightly stroke it, and that would take it back if it's quite a fine finish. It's coming off all right. But this stuff here, I did it against the grain. Because you can imagine trying to do that. It's not ideal, but it's just trying to get in. So you can get these with different shapes heads on there. You can get them with points, you can get them. So if you are looking and you want to try it and you've heard great things about them, you might find one that's got a set that's got more heads, but depends how ornate your piece is. So that's not proving very easy that way. That's why I gouged it last time. So good for the flat surface, a little bit more tricky on the edges. You might want to look at sort of, you could probably just really sand those bits off there. But yeah, another one to be aware of if you might need to use it. Certainly speedy. And if you were doing like a solid wood piece, and it wasn't really a complex piece, you know, you'd be done in no time. So want to consider. And I've got a big pile of dust on the floor. Let's have a little look. Amy has used one quite a bit, definitely a workout and takes some getting used to for technique, but I like it for certain things. I think that's a good summation, really. I like all of these techniques for certain things. Yeah, and when I've got sort of the curves and the damage I've got on this, I'm just going to go to my my sort of fail safe. What I will say is, when it comes to damage like this, it's quite an unusual amount of damage. And I've got it on that top edge, haven't I, on the top piece. How much damage have you got on yours, Amy, actually? Because Amy and I are doing the same piece, so it's going to be interesting to see how they come out at the end. And but this in itself, actually, sorry, you really can't see it. This damage here where the veneer has actually gone and it's lifting. There's no sort of, I wouldn't say one method or the other. I'm just playing it safe with the stripper, and just being really careful with how I scrape it off is how I'm going to do it. These sort of curves here can sometimes be a bit challenging with the electric sander. You can end up with a line, so I don't want to do that. You could, in some instances, if you did want to do it with an electric sander or a scraper, you could do your repairs first. So with sanding, if I've got areas that I want to fill like this, I usually would fill them before I sand, so that I can sand off the filler while I'm doing them. But obviously in this instance, putting stripper on top of stuff like that, it could actually compromise the filler and just, mean I have to do it again. Same with glue, obviously it's the wet could cause issues. So I'm just going to be really careful and do my repairs next week, and I'll show you them. But if you've got areas and you want to sand and you want to glue, you sort of have to either wait for next week or have a look in the supply list for what I'd suggest using and go for it. But you might want to glue some of these things down if you're sanding and scraping, and you might fill them if you're sanding. If you're scraping, you probably don't really want the lumps of filler sat there like that. So I'm just going for it, but I don't think there's necessarily a wrong or a right way with stuff like that. You've just got to go really, really careful. We'll see how it goes, basically. Yeah, they are good. But like I say, if you're starting out, want to park it for another time and come back to it. But it's good to show you here, because you might think, ooh, or oh God, no. Let's have a look. So I'm just going to show you how the comments. Helen, I have another newer piece that I think is thick plasticky lacquer. Would a scraper work on that? I'm going to show you that, and I'm sorry that we have run a bit longer. If you can stick around, I will show you that, or I can show you that in the next session. Just let me know how you are for time. You've used a thick finish and it's quite effective. You can get good angle and a good flow. Let me just put that comment in. This, I think, is response to Helen's about the thicker. I had quite an old Art Deco cabinet recently, which proved interesting on every level in terms of finish, because nothing seemed to penetrate it, and with stripper it went quite difficult. But I think with the benefit of hindsight, I'd have used a heat gun on it. I used a scraper, and all I got was lots and lots of white curls coming off, which was the thickness of it. And the sander, I had it on there for about 20 minutes and it was still just showing, a little patch, which would have been a nightmare. So yes, I was going to show you the heat gun. Scraper is good for flat surfaces, Nadine says, but you need to be really careful. You need to be really careful. And it's lovely and quick. So you see there's pros and cons. And so I'm just showing you my preferred one, which I think, just because of the riskiness of veneer, old veneer. After the assessment, loads more than I thought. Amy's talking about her piece of furniture like mine. Yeah, I must admit, when I started cleaning this and pulling the rest of the bits out, I was thinking, oh my God. Yeah, it's certainly not going to be a quick flip. Certainly not. I would like to finish off these pieces. So I think we'll try and do it within the section, so it's all together. So yeah, I think that's what we'll do. We'll crack on. It might be next to another half an hour. So I will just come back to this and see if any of it's ready to clear off. And if not, I'll show you the heat gun, which is one of those situations where I just wouldn't bother using any of the kind of fish. I'd just go straight for that. Where's the... It's quite interesting. There's a big blob of paint on the front of this cupboard, and that's wrinkled up beautifully. And he's obviously spilt it on it. I think let's do the heat gun first. It's not that cold in here. The colder it is, the slower it goes as well. That's the other thing to note. We have to watch our temperatures, hot and cold. Extremes are, for all our products, can be an issue. But the bits in the middle are alright. So I'm just going to leave that for a bit longer and then I'll scrape it off. Quite sure it's ready yet. Should be. Yeah, that's sticky too. Right, let's just show you the put it on there. And, okay. I don't know if I like my new scraper. I don't feel like I want to use it on this thing. It's very heavy and it's quite thick, so I don't know if it's a bit too thick, whereas this has got it's pliable but solid. Hey ho. So this Helen, was it Helen? Sorry, I just double check it was asking about plasticky finishes, and I think we also talked about this in terms of Nadine's piece might be something thick, although from the look of the pictures it looks like it has actually pulled off the finish, so I'm hoping for your sake it's a bit easier. But there's been a few instances where I've come across really thick, shiny finishes, and I thought, I don't actually know if that's wood or not. Especially, this is an example here, when the grain is a bit wacky, and I thought, oh, you know, you can't see any texture of the actual wood grain. It almost looks like plastic. Let's get some light on that. You see? Glossy. And there is quite a bit of mid-century furniture around with this really thick, and it's presumably sprayed finish, where I put stripper on top of that and just wiped it off, and it made absolutely no, so it's obviously some kind of plastic, early polyurethane or something, but it's, yeah, it is actually wood. So you see I've stripped it in the past, it's actually really nice wood. So this is where I've used all of the different solvents, acetone and white spirit, and all I've got is a little bit of frosting off some of them, so it's just haven't even touched it. So when I see something like this, I no longer try anything on it. I just go straight to the heat gun, because it will come off in a layer effectively with heat. And if I did find something that would melt that down, what a gooey mess you'd end up in. You want, you know, whatever you put on it to sort of to come off easily, but not to make it sort of worse for yourself. So you can get things like lacquer thinners and that sort of stuff, but I just think you end up with a gooey mess. Whereas this comes off rather satisfyingly, a bit like toffee. So that's the approach. If you've got something like this, if you've got something that you're not sure whether it's laminate or wood, it's a kind of a good idea to sort of test it out using the steps in that guide that I've put, just to make sure, because you might actually just be melting laminate. So have a little look. Sometimes it involves just doing like a little sand to see if you can go through it, see if you can come up with some dust. But otherwise a heat gun is the only other way that I'm aware of, without too much heartache. And I mean, this is only sort of 22, 23 quid or something. So not necessary again, but if you've got something or you see something, you find something that's got that kind of finish on, then it's actually quite a low investment for what it does. And it's got lots of other uses as well around the house. I'm just going to use it comes with a whole host of different attachments. I'm going to use the one it's got like a vent that points down, so it can concentrate a bit like a hairdryer, I suppose, concentrates the heat. I've got one on there already. Probably doing something else with it, like that. And then just take you up again. So all over the furniture. Everything sort of concentrated to a small area of the room. So you need to get that going and warmed up. See what this is. Yeah, I've got it on high now. Just testing it. It's starting to go. I don't want to hold it on the wood for too long, so I might get a burn. So I just want to. There we go. Just keep it slightly ahead of where this could do with bringing it down as well. Turn it off for a minute because that's moving. You've got a bench, right? So you in your workshop, even better one. I've got one of those. Getting bigger pieces last time. But it's been stored since then, so maybe it's drier than it was. You can see that's coming off in pieces. It looks better than having to take time to sand it or strip it. Yeah. Well, you get the idea anyway. It's again something you want to concentrate on. But I have had ones. I'm sure this was like that last time. It came off in sort of bigger pieces. But anyway, it's quite satisfying. So that's the way I think to handle those really thick plasticky finishes. It might also be something that you would consider for your dresser, Debbie. Obviously, you might need good ventilation with an oil-based paint, but that might go through all the layers at once if it feels like it's got a really tough, solid coating on with the gloss paint and something else you said. And then you can assess it from there with what comes off, if there's anything penetrating, if you might need to use something to clarify or cleanse the wood out afterwards, depending on what's been underneath the gloss. Let's have a look. Yeah, looks like that'll be the way to go on the other piece once you're ready to do it. It's pretty straightforward. You just need to keep moving and really watch, actually, because this is getting a bit old, that, and I do use it for other things, as you've seen with the prep work, getting fittings off, that you don't get any little, I have got a little one there, and that, because that can scrape your wood. So the quest goes on to find a new replacement for this, you know, that's as thin for scraping, because that isn't. But yeah, very satisfying and quick. And then at the end, so the heat gun, the cabinet scraping, which is here, and the stripping would all need sanding at the end to get them smooth, to get any last sort of residue off, to get that roughness off. So they would get finished with a 180. But we'll pick up on that when we get to next week, when we've got the dried stripped pieces. So I will take the strip off this one. It might not be quite ready, but we'll do it, and then you can see how to get it off without getting in a horrible mess. And then the beginning of the next session, we'll actually, you know, make sure that we're going to be looking at getting the wood sound effectively. So it's all about repairs, but it's making sure that it's ready. All the finish is definitely off, and it's nice and smooth, ready for the next stages. Leanne says she's used a heat gun on gloss paint on doors, and it was very satisfying. Yeah, it is satisfying. I rarely have to use it for that purpose, but yeah, as you go along, you sort of think, nope, I'm never going to put stripper on that again, or try and sand it off. So yeah, I can imagine on doors, it's very satisfying. I'm just wondering, yeah, and that might be why you want to try and look at things like this. This tool here, I don't use it terribly much because I do a lot of flat furniture. But if you did have like a door with moulding on it, or a bevel edge or whatever, you could use the different shapes of that to help you sort of lift up the finish. It's also good for scraping in that way. Let's have a look. Is there any way to tell if you are removing lead paint, or do you assume if it's an old piece? There is a test you can get. Yeah, there's a little kit you can get where you can test the finish to check whether it's lead paint. I don't know how I would know otherwise, but I wouldn't assume it, but I would probably test it. I think they're fairly inexpensive. It's like, you know, a little, like the ones that do the acid and alkali type tests, and you just a little dipper type thing. So yeah, I would probably do that. Actually, it's a good point. After over a certain age, it's likely, isn't it? I haven't fully stripped one piece of paint before, but I'm sure it's something we'll end up doing more and more of as time goes on, as we start running out of wooden pieces to refinish. And super satisfying to get all that paint off and take it back to the wood. So yeah, I'd have a little look. Maybe I always say Amazon, which is really bad, but I'm always last minute with ordering stuff. So yes, I would definitely check that out. My phone just died. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring you over here. I'll show you getting the stripper off, because if anybody's keeping up with me, wants to go off and get them done, you'll see that. And then what I'm going to do is I'll show you the after effect once it's dry. When we get to, I'll have to bring you onto here, sorry, because my phone's died. So there we go. You'll be able to see my head, so I might have to move up a little bit. Okay, so we'll get my favourite scraper. I will be careful of that though, because it has got a little ding in it and it might scrape my wood, so I will try my heavy one. So I use now, so I'm through all different methods, a little mini paint tray, and then I use foil, so it's just that lightweight wrapping foil. And then any old container will do. That doesn't have to be this. It's basically, I'm just going to use the edges of it to scrape my tool, or to scrape the stuff into, depending on how easy it comes off. I'll try a variety of these. Yeah, I think that one, play it safe. So actually what I normally do is scrape with the grain. I may have to go across it because of the shape of my door. Can you see this curved? Again, another reason why sanding and scraping will be tricky on this one. So I go with the grain just in case you do catch it. This is the point to also be aware if you're scraping a piece that's got little bits of damage. So you need to sort of, when you go into it, wear an apron, and also just be aware, okay, near the handle I have a little piece, so I've got to go around it just carefully. So you don't want to go too so this is even concave, even at the edges of it, this blade is too wide to actually get a good close shave, so to speak. So it'd almost be better going that way, but not digging in too deep. And then I'm just going to scrape the gunk off. Yeah, that's only touching there and there, not in the middle. So I might have to go this way on mine. But I'm not scraping too hard. I might scrape a bit harder if I was going with the grain, just to take more of the residue off the surface. Let me just see. I don't know where my smaller one is. I've got a narrower one knocking around somewhere. Oh well. Yeah, I've got one that's half the size of that, so I just have to, we'll have to wing it, because once I've got all this off, I'm then going to clean it, which will get the extra off. I just want to get as much off as I can before. So what's there now? Yeah, that's moving quite well. It's quite liquidy and it's not sticky and tacky. So it should come off nice and loosely like that. It may not be liquidy like that. It might be papery. It just depends what it is. So don't worry if it's not like that. In fact, if it's papery, it's really satisfying. So I'm just going to do. I'm not putting much pressure on it at all. I know it sounds like you can hear the noise, but it's not doing much. So the shape's a little bit tricky. I would like to get more stripper off this middle bit, but I can't get in there. So, and then okay, we'll just have to go for it. There's a bit more on there than I normally leave. And then that tin foil can just all go in the bin. So you don't have to get, probably at this point, and I'm going to put the gloves on for this point, because I'm going to get my hands involved where the finish is in with the stripper. And then grab, this is where I love these little sponges, because what happens is all of the gunk kind of goes inside and it leaves the scourer free to still clean the wood, rather than little scrubbies, little green ones. It sort of sits on the surface, you just end up with like wiping the same stuff around, which is not what you want, because you're using this to sort of almost scrape as well. So I'm just going to use a bit of water. Oh, these gloves aren't waterproof. They protect my hands. They're rubber on the front, but fabric on the back. So I usually use warm water. This isn't anymore. And then all I'll do is, I'm going to do it with the grain again, is scrub over the top. And then I'll rinse. I'm trying to get like that. And then, like I said, I put these in the washing machine, but then I probably wouldn't if it was a more toxic stripper, or a toxic stripper, I should say. I'll just do half of it, and you can see. And you can sort of get into the edges with this then. You see how nice and quick that was there. It's not. Can't see what's happening down there, but. So that's the half and half. So you can see how that's completely clean and dry now. Sometimes you might get wipe marks on your wood, so don't worry about that. You can sometimes see where you've applied it, or I think it's just where it's moved some of the old finish and a little bit of the stain, and it looks like it's on the surface. Don't worry about it, because when this is dry, we will give it a light sand, and then we will use mineral spirits and white spirits to sort of, which effectively tones the wood. It sort of cleanses out any of that last residue, and you'll see that any of those marks will just disappear. So you're going to get a really nice view of what your wood looks like. So what I'll do is I'll finish that off after, and then I'm just going to literally stand these up to dry, and then obviously I'll do the same on the sides. I'll have to put something underneath, but this stuff's quite good at clinging. Some of them are really drippy, so I'll do the top and the sides with this as well. So it looks like I've got nice wood on there, and then all the drawers. So I'm going to do a comparison of stripper and scraper and thingy on the drawers, aren't I? So I can see what the colours are, see if there's a bit more colour residue left behind in the other ones. That's it. The other thing is, I'm going to test these out actually, but I didn't actually do it, did I? I bought some natural jute cleaning pads, which also have an interior, just to see if the non-plastic option works. So I'll report back on those. And then also your these little brushes. Probably the nylon ones are best. Oh, disappeared, sorry. These little brushes are really handy for getting into the edges of things if you've got any detail on any carvings or any, I don't know if there's anything that sort of elaborate, but that helps to get your stripper out when you're cleaning. So there's a whistle-stop tour through all of the stripping methods there. The only other one to mention that I'm aware of is using some kind of media to literally blast off a finish. So you can use, well, the typical one people talk about is sandblasting, but sandblasting is too intense for this kind of furniture, and wood really anyway. So you can use things like walnut shells, you can use soda, soda's probably the most common one. There's other kinds of crystals and things like little beads and things like that can take the surface off. But you need a compressor for that so that it fires it at sort of great speed, and that can strip back really ornate carved things really, really well. And it's quite inexpensive if you've already got a compressor. The gun itself isn't that expensive, but it's just the cleanup and the soda going everywhere. You're going to have to put a big sheet out to gather it all up and that sort of thing. But if you're finding you're working on a lot of quite ornate furniture, I wouldn't say it would be the best necessarily for doing all your flat surfaces. I think it's bringing out for certain pieces that need you to get into more detail. But it's good to be aware of. When people come along and ask you things, you think, how do I do that? That could be an option. And I don't know if Sally's around actually today, but she's just been started soda blasting, which looks incredibly satisfying, I have to say, on something that was quite carved. Is she around? I don't think she is around. Anyway, so let me know if you've got any questions with relating to your piece, if there's anything there that you need a bit more detail on in terms of what you would do in your scenario, and then I can help you out. I'm going to try this little scrubby and just give you a few minutes to think, and then we'll have our session on. I've got some notes to put up. I'll have our session on Thursday, where you can come back, and if you have any thoughts on things across the board, it doesn't have to be just about this section because you might not have got to it yet. Let's give these a go. It could be a mitigated disaster. So although the silver things are multiple use, I'm sure that somebody would tell me there's bits of plastic coming off them when they're washed. Yeah, it definitely has more gunk on the surface. Doesn't pick it up in the same way. If you know anything else I can try, it's like to improve processes. Possible. It's working. You're just going to end up with a little bit of a residue that might be sanded off. But you can, if you have got a residue at the end, grab a bit of your cleaner and spray that on and give that a rub back, and that can sometimes cut through the last little bit of grub that's there. So you don't have to just use plain water. But don't leave a lot of standing water on it, I should say also. See how dry that is. And make sure, grab your paper towels or your rags or your microfiber cloths at the end if there is water, and just make sure it's nice and dry. I see I was wringing that out, so that's just something to be aware of, because you don't want to We don't want to disturb the veneer, but that's what we're doing next week. If you've got any damaged bits like mine, if you've got any lifted bits, if you've got any bubbling bits, we'll be looking at all of that and how to handle it. So if you've got any specific bits like that, quite good to highlight them to me so I can make sure to cover them off. I'm good. I'm glad it has. It was sort of bouncing about between techniques because it's not easy to do stripping in real time. It's the first time that I've gone end to end with it, so I hope it got across okay. But yeah, like I say, just if you come back to this and you want to ask me questions, just do, or post up in the group a picture of your piece if you're thinking, what do I do here? Or you just want some help to decide the best way to attack it, then yeah, post up a pic and we can have a little look. Yeah, sorry we're going a bit over time. It's a bit difficult to stop in the middle of that one, isn't it? But anyway. Okay, so we'll catch up with you on Thursday if you're around. If not, feel free to drop any questions you've got on that event for Thursday, or any pictures, anything like that. And if anybody does want to come in and actually show me their piece, because it's too hard to take pictures of, you can join in that live and come in and show your piece, ask a question, and pop out again if you want to. So that's another option. Fabulous. It's all a bit suck it and see, but yeah, brilliant. Well, I hope you'll get some chance to work on your pieces and look forward to seeing what you get up to, and I'll catch up with you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you soon. Bye.